double lives of crime, serial criminals who were also entertainers. Welcome to Odd Occasions, where we explore the bizarre, the curious, and the downright unbelievable. Today, we're diving into the chilling yet fascinating world of serial criminals who lived double lives as entertainers. These are the people who, while captivating audiences with their talent, were hiding a far darker side. From kidnapped singers to performers who blurred the line between crime and art, we've got stories that will leave you speechless. So get ready for a journey into the unexpected, a world where fame and infamy collide. Let's begin. Number 10. Mary Jane Jones, the kidnapped Queen of Soul. Mary Jane Jones had the kind of voice that could stop people in their tracks, a powerful, soulful sound that spoke to her gospel roots. Performing under the name Vicky Jones, she quickly gained a reputation in local nightclubs for her stirring renditions of popular soul songs. But behind her rise to fame lay a chilling ordeal that blurred the lines between talent and terror. It all started in the late 1960s when Jones was approached by Lavelle Hardy, a struggling musician with a dubious reputation. Hardy had once enjoyed modest success with a single that charted briefly, but his glory days were long behind him. Now, he earned a living impersonating James Brown at small venues across the country. When Hardy saw Jones perform, he couldn't help but notice something uncanny, her striking resemblance to Aretha Franklin. Hardy proposed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He told Jones she'd been chosen to open for the real Aretha Franklin on tour. The offer seemed like her big break, and she agreed without hesitation. But what Jones didn't know was that Hardy's plans were far more sinister. As soon as she left with him, Hardy revealed his true intentions. Jones wasn't going to open for Franklin, she was going to impersonate her. Under threat of violence, Hardy forced Jones to sing Franklin's hits in sold-out concerts across Florida. During the day, he locked her in hotel rooms. At night, she took to the stage, delivering breathtaking performances of Respect and Chain of Fools that left audiences stunned. The ruse might have gone unnoticed if it weren't for the arrival of the real Aretha Franklin in Florida. When Franklin learned of the fraud, she alerted local authorities. By this point, Jones had performed for thousands, earning Hardy a small fortune. But her captivity was about to end. In Fort Myers, just as Jones was about to take the stage, police stormed the venue. Hardy was arrested, and Jones was freed. While the ordeal could have ended her career, it did just the opposite. The media coverage transformed her into a national sensation, and her voice gained recognition for its own merits. Mary Jane Jones became a celebrated singer, proving that even in the face of unimaginable circumstances, talent and resilience could shine through. Number 9. Frederick Lenz, the cult leader who tried to dance into electronica fame. Frederick Lenz, also known as Rama, wore many hats in his lifetime: self-proclaimed spiritual leader, tech entrepreneur, and, most bizarrely, aspiring electronica musician. While some saw him as an enlightened guru blending Eastern philosophies with New Age ideas, others labeled him a manipulative charlatan. Whichever side you landed on, one thing was certain: Lenz left behind a legacy as strange as it was unsettling. To his followers, Lenz was a visionary, offering spiritual guidance with a futuristic twist. His teachings were a hodgepodge of Buddhism, Hinduism, and his own brand of mystical technophilia. He encouraged disciples to pursue high-paying careers in tech and finance, claiming it would help them achieve enlightenment. But there was a catch. Lenz demanded that members tithe significant portions of their earnings to his businesses, which operated more like a pyramid scheme than a spiritual organization. By embedding his followers into industries like software development and Wall Street, Lenz raked in millions of dollars annually. Former members would later allege that he exercised control through financial manipulation, coercion, and even sexual exploitation. But financial schemes and spiritual manipulation weren't the strangest parts of Lenz's life. That honor belonged to his music career. Lenz funneled a hefty portion of his wealth into producing music. Over the years, he released 14 albums, most of which were supposed to convey his teachings. The results were unusual, to say the least. His albums spanned a surreal mix of genres, blending meditative chants with experimental techno beats. If his music was meant to unlock spiritual enlightenment, it often sounded more like a fever dream. Take his infamous track, What Is Dancing? The music video for the song begins innocently enough, with Lenz offering a serene smile against the backdrop of a tranquil sunset. But within moments, things take a turn. Viewers are thrown into a bizarre kaleidoscope of imagery, claymation animals, robotic breakdancers, and a plastic cow orbiting Lenz in a cosmic asteroid field. A dreadlocked robot grooves to a keytar solo while a lip-syncing Buddha nods along. The video careens between absurd and unsettling, leaving viewers with more questions than answers. Critics of his music weren't limited to outsiders. Some of Lenz's own followers were baffled by his artistic direction. Yet, many continued to support his endeavors, convinced that even his strangest creations carried profound meaning. But the cracks in Lenz's empire grew deeper. By the late 1990s, former members began speaking out. They described a man who wasn't just eccentric, but manipulative and abusive. Allegations surfaced of fraud, psychological control, and sexual coercion. Lenz's public image spiraled, and his once loyal following began to dwindle. In 1998, facing mounting scrutiny and legal troubles, Lenz's life came to a tragic and mysterious end. In a suicide pact with his girlfriend, Lenz consumed over 150 tabs of Valium. While his girlfriend survived, Lenz did not. He was 48. To this day, Lenz remains a polarizing figure. Was he a misunderstood guru, a scam artist, or just a man chasing a vision too strange for this world? One thing's for sure. His legacy, much like his music, is as surreal as it is haunting. Number 8. Charles Peace, the Acrobat, Burglar with a Dark Side. Charles Peace lived anything but a peaceful life. In Victorian England, his name became synonymous with cunning burglaries, scandalous affairs, and cold-blooded murder. But before he became one of the most infamous criminals of the 19th century, Peace had dreams of a very different life, one filled with music, theater, and applause. Born in Sheffield in 1832 to a working-class family, Peace grew up in a world of modest means. His father was an animal tamer, and the young Charles was enthralled by the art of performance. Inspired, he dreamed of becoming an entertainer. But tragedy struck when, as a teenager, he took a job in a steel factory to help support his family. In a horrific accident, a piece of molten steel shot through his leg, leaving him permanently disfigured. Hobbling out of the hospital on crutches, Peace's world turned dark. He blamed his misfortune on the upper class, whom he believed controlled the dangerous working conditions. This bitterness festered and eventually evolved into his dual life, an entertainer by day and a burglar by night. Despite his injury, Peace proved remarkably agile. He became an accomplished violinist, captivating audiences in small performances across England. His skills as a Shakespearean actor earned him roles in traveling productions, allowing him to tour the country. But behind the charm and charisma of his onstage persona lay a darker purpose. His theater tours doubled as reconnaissance missions, scouting wealthy homes to rob under the cover of night. Peace's dexterity didn't end with the violin or the stage. He trained himself in acrobatics, and despite his disfigured leg, he was able to climb walls, shimmy up drainpipes, and leap from rooftop to rooftop with ease. His incredible feats baffled police, who initially believed a gang of burglars was responsible for the wave of high-profile break-ins sweeping the country. By the 1850s, Peace had earned a notorious reputation. He often worked alone, taking great care to leave no trace behind. But his luck eventually ran out. He was caught and convicted of burglary multiple times, serving short stints in prison. Each time he was released, he returned to his criminal ways, his skills growing sharper with every escape. In 1876, Peace's life took an even darker turn. During a burglary in Manchester, a police officer spotted him fleeing the scene. Cornered and desperate, Peace pulled out a pistol and shot the officer, killing him instantly. It was his first known murder, and it marked a chilling escalation in his crimes. Later that same year, Peace became entangled in a scandalous love affair that would end in more bloodshed. He was romantically involved with a woman named Nellie Dyson, who was married to a civil engineer, Arthur Dyson. When Arthur confronted Peace about the affair, the encounter turned violent. Peace fatally shot Arthur and fled into hiding. For 2 years, Peace evaded capture, traveling under aliases and continuing his life of crime. But in 1878, his luck ran out. Arrested during yet another burglary, his true identity was uncovered. At his trial, his sordid history and murders were laid bare. The jury took little time to convict him, and he was sentenced to death. On February 25, 1879, Charles Peace was hanged at Armley Jail in Leeds. His last words reportedly expressed regret, not for his crimes, but for having been caught. Peace's story became legend in Victorian England, immortalized in plays, ballads, and penny dreadfuls. To some, he was a tragic figure, a man whose dreams of stardom were derailed by misfortune. To others, he was a cold, calculating killer who used his charm and agility to wreak havoc on society. Either way, his legacy endures as one of the most infamous criminal entertainers in history. Number 7. Elmer Edward Solly, the murderer who stole a musician's identity. In the world of rock and roll, some stories are stranger than fiction, and the tale of Elmer Edward Solly is no exception. This is the story of a man who committed an unthinkable crime, escaped justice, and went on to live as a musician under a stolen identity. The saga begins in the late 1960s. Solly was a man with a troubled past, a fiery temper, and a penchant for poor decisions. In 1969, during a drunken argument with his girlfriend, Solly committed a heinous act. He killed her 2-year-old child in a fit of rage. Convicted of murder, he was sentenced to 15 to 20 years in a maximum security prison. But prison couldn't hold Solly. During a brief furlough in the 1970s, he vanished without a trace, becoming one of America's most wanted fugitives. For years, authorities searched for him in vain. While Solly was running from the law, the music world was grappling with its own loss. Sha Na Na, a doo-wop revival group known for their theatrical 1950s-inspired performances, was riding a wave of nostalgia. The band gained attention after a surprising appearance at Woodstock in 1969, sharing the stage with rock legends like Jimi Hendrix and Santana. Though their style was worlds apart from the countercultural vibe of the festival, Sha Na Na capitalized on the renewed interest in vintage rock, eventually scoring a variety show and a spot on the Grease soundtrack. Among the band's many members was Chris Donald, a guitarist who performed under the stage name Vinnie Taylor. Taylor was charismatic, talented, and beloved by fans. Tragically, his star burned out too soon. In 1974, at just 25 years old, he died of a heroin overdose, leaving behind a grieving band and a hole in their lineup. Enter Elmer Edward Solly. After years on the run, Solly seized an opportunity to reinvent himself. He took on the persona of Chris Donald, claiming that Vinnie Taylor hadn't died, but had instead gone into hiding. With a new stage name, Danny C., Solly began performing as a musician. He wasn't just impersonating Taylor, he was rewriting history. Remarkably, Solly managed to avoid detection for decades, even fooling members of Sha Na Na when they confronted him. His explanation? He told them he had faked his death under orders from the CIA. weaving an elaborate tale about government conspiracies and covert missions. The story was bizarre enough that some believed it, at least for a time. Eventually, Solly's lies unraveled. In 2001, after more than 30 years on the run, he was arrested and exposed as both a murderer and an impostor. Surprisingly, despite the gravity of his crimes, Solly only served 2 additional years in prison before being released. The strange case of Elmer Edward Solly leaves us with more questions than answers. How did a fugitive manage to live openly as a performer for decades without being caught? And what drove him to choose such a bold and public disguise? In the end, Solly's story serves as a cautionary tale about deception, reinvention, and the limits of redemption. Even in a world as wild and unpredictable as rock and roll, some secrets can't stay hidden forever. Number 6. Mike Warnke, the comedian con artist who sparked the Satanic Panic. In the world of entertainment, few figures are as controversial or as fraudulent as Mike Warnke. Self-proclaimed as America's #1 Christian comedian, Warnke built a career that straddled the line between religious devotion and outright deception. But behind the jokes and sermons lay a sinister legacy. A con artist who capitalized on fear to ignite one of the most infamous moral panics in modern history. Warnke's rise to fame began in the 1970s, but it wasn't through comedy. In 1972, he published a book titled The Satan Seller, an alleged autobiography that detailed his supposed descent into the dark world of Satanism. According to Warnke, he was a high priest in a demonic cult, engaging in grotesque rituals, including child sacrifice, before finding salvation through Christianity. The book became a bestseller, and Warnke transformed overnight into a leading authority on satanic rituals, despite offering no credible evidence for his claims. He began touring the country, delivering fiery lectures to church audiences, blending his supposed first-hand accounts of evil with humor that was as canned as it was unoriginal. Warnke's timing was impeccable. His book and subsequent speaking career coincided with rising fears about Satanism in America, fears that would snowball into what became known as the Satanic Panic. Throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, paranoia swept the nation, fueled by lurid tales of satanic cults infiltrating daycare centers and small towns. Warnke's stories added fuel to the fire, convincing countless Christians that an underground network of devil worshippers was lurking just beyond their doorstep. Despite the lack of credible evidence, Warnke's influence was profound. His records sold over 1 million copies, and his success paved the way for the Christian comedy circuit, a new avenue of entertainment that launched the careers of figures like Chanda Pierce and Sinbad. In 1988, Tennessee Governor Ned McWhirter even declared June 29th as Mike Warnke Day, a testament to the comedian's widespread popularity. But Warnke's empire was built on lies. For nearly 2 decades, skeptics had pointed out inconsistencies in his story. The details in The Satan Seller didn't align with verifiable timelines from Warnke's own life. His claims of leading massive satanic gatherings in the 1960s were absurdly exaggerated, and no corroborating witnesses ever emerged. Finally, in 1991, Warnke's house of cards came crashing down. Cornerstone, a Christian investigative magazine, published a detailed exposé that dismantled Warnke's claims piece by piece. Journalists found former friends and acquaintances who painted a very different picture of Warnke's life during the period he claimed to be a satanic high priest. Far from a cult leader, Warnke was described as an ordinary young man with no ties to anything remotely sinister. The fallout was swift, but incomplete. While Warnke's career took a hit, the damage caused by his fabricated tales was irreversible. The Satanic Panic had already reached a fever pitch by the time he was exposed. Families were torn apart, and dozens of innocent people were falsely accused and imprisoned for crimes they didn't commit. Among the most infamous cases tied to the hysteria were those of Dan and Fran Keller, a couple who operated a daycare center in Austin, Texas. In 1991, the same year Warnke was unmasked, they were convicted of heinous crimes involving satanic rituals, based entirely on coerced testimony and wild speculation. The Kellers spent 21 years in prison before being exonerated in 2013, their lives shattered by a moral panic Warnke helped create. As for Warnke, he never faced legal consequences for his deception. While his credibility within Christian circles waned, he continued to perform for smaller audiences, clinging to the remnants of his once thriving career. Mike Warnke's story is a sobering reminder of how fear and manipulation can upend lives. Through fabricated tales and calculated deceit, he profited off paranoia and left a trail of devastation in his wake. His legacy isn't one of faith or comedy, but of the very real harm that can come when truth is sacrificed for personal gain. Number 5. Attila Ambrus, the hockey player who became a legendary bank robber. Attila Ambrus's life reads like something out of a dark comedy, a tale of desperation, absurdity, and unexpected charm. Born in Transylvania in 1967, Ambrus grew up under the oppressive regime of Nicolae Ceausescu, where opportunities were scarce and dreams were often crushed before they began. But Ambrus wasn't the kind of man to settle for a bleak future. He would carve out his own path, no matter how unconventional or illegal it turned out to be. In 1988, at the age of 21, Ambrus smuggled himself into Hungary by clinging to the undercarriage of a passenger train. It was a daring escape, and one that set the tone for the rest of his life. Arriving in Budapest with nothing but hope, Ambrus had one goal: to play professional hockey for Újpest TE, Hungary's premier team. There was just one problem. Ambrus had never played hockey before. When he showed up to tryouts, his lack of skill was painfully obvious. As a goalie, he let more pucks through than a broken dam, and his fumbling attempts at blocking shots quickly made him the laughingstock of the team. Opposing players once scored 23 goals on him in a single game, a record so embarrassing it's still talked about in Hungarian hockey circles. To add insult to injury, his teammates didn't just mock him, they physically assaulted him. One particularly bad practice left him with a broken nose, but Ambrus refused to quit. Desperate to stay with the team, he took a job as the arena janitor, sleeping in a broom closet at night and scraping together enough money to buy second-hand hockey equipment. Humiliated but determined, he swore to himself that he would never be poor again. It was during these low moments that Ambrus hatched a plan. While traveling across Hungary with Újpest TE for games, he began robbing banks. Nicknamed the Whiskey Robber for his habit of taking swigs of booze during heists, Ambrus became a folk hero. His robberies were marked by an unusual mix of daring and courtesy. Before demanding cash, he would often hand flowers to the female tellers and apologize for the inconvenience. While his methods were unconventional, they were shockingly effective. Hungarian banks at the time were poorly secured, with little to no alarms and guards who were more ornamental than functional. Ambrus exploited this weakness to the fullest, striking banks and post offices with precision. Over the course of his criminal career, he committed 27 robberies, stealing over 100 million forints, equivalent to roughly $500,000. Despite his growing infamy, the Hungarian police struggled to catch him. Their incompetence became part of the legend. In one robbery, Ambrus disguised himself as a wig-wearing woman, complete with makeup, and still managed to escape unnoticed. In 1999, his luck finally ran out. Arrested after a robbery, Ambrus was sent to jail to await trial. But his story didn't end there. Using bedsheets, shoelaces, and a telephone cable, he fashioned a makeshift rope and climbed out the window of his cell. His escape set off a nationwide manhunt involving 400 officers, but it took months before he was recaptured. Ambrus's exploits captured the imagination of the Hungarian public. To many, he wasn't a criminal, but a modern-day Robin Hood, a charming underdog who outwitted the system. Songs were written about him, and his story was adapted into films and books. After serving his prison sentence, Ambrus reinvented himself yet again. He became a successful ceramic artist, creating intricate pottery and selling it across Europe. Now living a quieter life, he often reflects on his past with a mix of pride and regret. Attila Ambrus may not have been a great hockey player, or even a good one, but he was undeniably one of the most colorful figures in Hungary's modern history. His story is a testament to resilience, creativity, and the surprising paths life can take. Number 4. George Bosque, the Brinks guard who stole millions to make a cocaine-fueled gay Roman epic. George Bosque's story is one of contradictions. He started life as a self-proclaimed moral crusader, but ended it as a fugitive financier of one of the most infamous films in the underground gay subculture. Fueled by heartbreak, drugs, and a hefty dose of hubris, his bizarre path from Brinks' security guard to film producer is unlike anything you've ever heard. Bosque grew up harboring dreams of joining the police force. He fancied himself a defender of conservative values, writing letters decrying nudity, drug use, and homosexuality. His opinions, extreme even by the standards of the time, bordered on fascist. He openly described himself as a Nazi. But whatever his youthful convictions were, they wouldn't last. Unable to pursue his dream of law enforcement, Bosque found employment as a security guard for Brinks, a company known for its armored vehicles and high-stakes cash transfers. By 1980, Bosque was driving one of those iconic trucks, ferrying millions of dollars in cold, hard cash. It wasn't long before his personal life took a turn. Bosque began a relationship with his co-worker, Carl Denton, an affair that ended in a breakup Bosque couldn't handle. Angry and humiliated, he decided to exact revenge on the world, or perhaps simply escape it. One fateful day, Bosque absconded with $185 million in cash from a Brinks truck and vanished. Where did he go? Into a world no one expected. Hiding in plain sight, Bosque immersed himself in New York City's underground gay subculture, a place as far removed from his conservative roots as one could imagine. With millions at his disposal, he indulged in every excess imaginable. Chief among them was a crippling cocaine addiction that fueled his increasingly erratic behavior. But Bosque wasn't content to simply spend the stolen money on drugs and decadence. He wanted to leave his mark. In 1981, he decided to finance a film, Centurions of Rome, deliberately misspelled, likely for copyright reasons. What Bosque envisioned was an epic gay pornographic feature set in the splendor of ancient Rome, complete with lavish costumes, decadent sets, and a level of production value unheard of in the adult film industry. The film's budget was astronomical for the genre, nearly $200,000, equivalent to over $600,000 today. But Bosque didn't stop at funding. He inserted himself into the production, rewriting the script on a whim and insisting on his own lines, which were so poorly written they became an ongoing joke among the cast and crew. The production was a chaotic disaster. Many of the performers, mostly strippers hired to play Roman centurions, had no experience acting or riding horses, which the script demanded. Bosque's cocaine-fueled micromanagement brought filming to a halt more than once. One particularly absurd moment occurred when a crew member, laughing uncontrollably at one of Bosque's lines, fell and collapsed a key set piece. As Bosque's funds dwindled, production slowed to a crawl. By the time Centurions of Rome was finally cobbled together and released, Bosque's world was crumbling. His erratic behavior and conspicuous spending caught the attention of law enforcement, and 15 months after his daring heist, he was arrested. The story of George Bosque is a wild ride through greed, excess, and ambition gone awry. While Centurions of Rome remains a cult classic in certain circles, Bosque's legacy is less about the film and more about the incredible lengths he went to in his pursuit of reinvention. From security guard to fugitive filmmaker, his story is a bizarre footnote in the annals of both crime and cinema. Number 3. Paul Bateson, the real-life monster behind The Exorcist. In 1973, The Exorcist terrified audiences worldwide. Its chilling story of demonic possession, gruesome imagery, and haunting performances cemented its place as one of the scariest films ever made. But years later, the movie would take on an even darker legacy, thanks to a man who appeared briefly on screen, Paul Bateson. Bateson's role in the film was small but unforgettable. In one of the most unsettling sequences, young Regan undergoes a spinal tap and MRI as doctors search for answers to her mysterious condition. Among the hospital staff depicted in the scene is Bateson, a real-life radiology technician at New York University Medical Center. With his steady hands and calm demeanor, Bateson's performance lent a grim authenticity to the moment. But Bateson's life off-screen was far from steady. After his cameo in The Exorcist, his career in radiology failed to take off. Struggling with alcoholism and feelings of aimlessness, he spiraled into a world of darkness that would soon make him infamous. By the mid-1970s, Bateson was living a double life. By day, he maintained the appearance of a mild-mannered technician. By night, he frequented Manhattan's gay bars, becoming a familiar face in the city's vibrant, yet often dangerous, nightlife scene. Between 1975 and 1977, something far more sinister was happening in the shadows. Authorities believe Bateson was murdering men he met in these bars. The gruesome details of the alleged killings are chilling. Bateson would reportedly lure men back to his apartment, where he dismembered them and disposed of their remains in the Hudson River. These crimes were never fully solved, but investigators linked Bateson to at least 6 victims whose bodies, some wrapped in plastic, had washed ashore. Dubbed the bag murders, the crimes terrified the LGBTQ+ community and left police baffled. Bateson's crimes might have gone undetected if not for a single fatal mistake. In 1979, he was arrested for the murder of Addison Verrill, a film industry journalist. Verrill was found bludgeoned and stabbed in his apartment, and police initially had no leads. However, a tip from a friend of the victim led investigators to Bateson, who eventually confessed. During questioning, Bateson reportedly bragged about other murders, hinting that he was responsible for the bag murders. However, these claims were never corroborated, and Bateson was only convicted for Verrill's murder. Sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, he was paroled in 2003. The connection between Bateson and The Exorcist haunted the film's director, William Friedkin. In an effort to process the shocking revelation, Friedkin revisited Bateson in prison and interviewed him for an upcoming project. This experience would go on to inspire Friedkin's controversial 1980 film Cruising, a psychological thriller about a detective investigating a series of brutal murders in New York's gay S&M clubs. While Cruising was a fictional work, its ties to Bateson's crimes were unmistakable. The movie sparked heated debates about its portrayal of the LGBTQ+ community and its blending of fact and fiction. Bateson himself became an unwelcome footnote in Hollywood history. A man whose brief on-screen role was forever overshadowed by his horrifying off-screen actions. Today, the legacy of Paul Bateson is one of grim fascination. His crimes remain a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in even the most familiar faces. And for fans of The Exorcist, his presence in the film adds an unsettling layer of real-life horror to an already terrifying story. Number 2. Tony Alamo, the cult leader behind Hollywood's glittering jackets. In the 1980s, Tony Alamo's name was synonymous with bold, rhinestone-studded denim jackets, a signature style beloved by some of the biggest celebrities of the era. Michael Jackson wore one on the cover of his Bad album. Dolly Parton, Burt Reynolds, Mr. T, and even Mike Tyson donned Alamo's dazzling creations. But behind the sequins and glamour of his multi-million-dollar fashion empire lay a much darker story. Tony Alamo wasn't just a designer, he was a cult leader, and his cult was built on abuse, exploitation, and horror. Tony Alamo, born Bernie Lazar Hoffman in 1934, started his career in Los Angeles as an aspiring pop singer. When his music career faltered, he reinvented himself as a fire and brimstone preacher. Along with his first wife, Susan, he founded the Tony and Susan Alamo Christian Foundation in the late 1960s. Based in Arkansas, the organization presented itself as a haven for the lost and downtrodden, but it quickly became a full-blown cult. Alamo's sermons were apocalyptic and laced with conspiracy theories. He ranted against Catholicism, claiming it was part of a global plot to control the world. His doomsday rhetoric attracted vulnerable followers who were then drawn into a life of servitude. Members of the foundation worked grueling hours in Alamo's various businesses, including the manufacturing of his now famous jackets. By the mid-1980s, Alamo's jackets had become a cultural phenomenon. Adorned with elaborate rhinestone designs, they were as bold as they were expensive, catapulting Alamo to newfound wealth and fame. But the success of the jacket business came at a staggering human cost. Much of the labor behind Alamo's jacket empire was performed by cult members, including children. Alamo ruled over his followers with an iron fist, subjecting them to physical abuse and psychological torment. Those who worked in his factories endured 14-hour shifts under brutal conditions, often cutting their fingers on the sharp rhinestones. The horrors didn't stop there. Alamo's obsession with control extended to his personal relationships, which were steeped in exploitation. He took multiple underage girls as his wives, coercing them into marriage under the guise of religious authority. One of the most chilling chapters in Alamo's story involved his first wife, Susan. When she died of breast cancer in 1982, Alamo refused to bury her. Instead, he embalmed her body and displayed it in a glass coffin, claiming that God would resurrect her. For 6 months, his followers, many of them children, were forced to gather around the corpse each night. They prayed and sang songs, including a macabre cover of the Everly Brothers' Wake Up Little Susie. When Susan failed to rise, Alamo punished his followers with beatings, blaming their lack of faith. As Alamo's empire grew, so did the scrutiny from authorities. Investigations into his practices revealed a litany of crimes, including tax evasion, child labor violations, and systemic sexual abuse. By the 1990s, his once thriving operation was crumbling. In 2009, he was convicted of 10 counts of child sexual abuse and sentenced to 175 years in federal prison. He died behind bars in 2017, leaving behind a legacy of suffering and exploitation. Despite the horrifying truth about Tony Alamo, his jackets remain a curious relic of pop culture history. To this day, vintage pieces occasionally resurface in Hollywood or fashion circles, their glitzy appeal masking the grim reality of their origins. Tony Alamo may have been a cult leader, disguised as a designer, but his story serves as a stark reminder that even the most glamorous facades can hide the darkest of secrets. Number 1. Dwight York, the cult leader who influenced hip-hop and committed unspeakable crimes. Dwight York's life is a chilling tale of influence, exploitation, and irreparable harm. His actions left a dark stain on both music history and the lives of his countless victims, proving that even figures who shape culture can harbor unimaginable darkness. York's criminal career began early. By his late teens, he was deeply entangled in crime, running with a violent offshoot of the Black Panther Party. By the age of 19, he had racked up a list of charges, including welfare fraud, extortion, arson, and assault. A weapons possession arrest in the 1960s landed him 3 years in prison. But rather than rehabilitate, York used his time behind bars to craft a new and insidious vision: Nuwaubianism. Nuwaubianism was a pseudo-religious movement that blended elements from Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Freemasonry, and York's own bizarre beliefs about alien overseers. After his release, York began preaching in New York City, where his magnetic personality quickly attracted followers. Money poured in, as York demanded absolute loyalty and financial devotion from his growing congregation. As York's influence grew, so did his appetite for power. He surrounded himself with enforcers, forming a group known as the Shotgun Gang, which carried out robberies and other criminal activities at his command. York's reach extended to orchestrating the murder of local activist Horace Green, a crime that sent shockwaves through the community but failed to deter his devoted followers. Despite this chaos, York also pursued a career in music, fronting a disco group called Passion. Although the band found only modest success, York's musical aspirations were not in vain. Through Nuwaubianism, York left a lasting mark on hip-hop. Founding fathers of the genre, such as Doug E. Fresh and Afrika Bambaataa, drew inspiration from York's teachings. Later artists like Outkast, De La Soul, M.F. Doom, Prodigy, and Erykah Badu referenced Nuwaubian beliefs in their lyrics. Outkast's seminal album, ATLians, is a prime example, blending York's ideas with cosmic imagery to create a groundbreaking sound. But while York's cultural footprint expanded, his followers paid the ultimate price. In the late 1980s, York moved his operation to the Catskills, where he imposed increasingly bizarre rules. Members were forced to wear cowboy outfits, and his paranoia about federal investigations led to another move, this time to rural Georgia, where York built a sprawling compound centered around a massive pyramid. By the early 2000s, federal authorities were closing in. In 2002, York was arrested, and the full scale of his depravity came to light. York was convicted of multiple child molestation charges, racketeering, and other crimes. The horrifying details of the case revealed that York had more than 1,000 victims, making his crimes one of the largest documented cases of child sexual abuse in U.S. history. Sentenced to 135 years in federal prison, York's reign of terror finally ended. York's story is a devastating reminder of how charisma and influence can mask the darkest of crimes. His impact on hip-hop, though undeniable, is forever tainted by the suffering he caused. Thanks for tuning in to Odd Occasions, where the strange meets the extraordinary. Today we've seen how the brightest spotlights can cast the darkest shadows. If you enjoyed uncovering these unsettling tales, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the bizarre and unbelievable. Until next time, stay curious, and always remember to question what lies beneath the surface. See you soon for another Odd Occasion.